Okay, we're going to look at some of the theories behind personality development and cognitive development in psychology, and there's kind of a lot going on here, so I'll try and break it down and make it easy to see. So the first psychologist that we'll look at in development is Erik Erikson and his concept of social development. And Erikson argues that life is split into 8 different stages. And in order to move from one stage to the next, there is a psychological crisis, a psychosocial crisis, I should say, that after people experience allows them to move on to the next level. It represents a turning point. And these crises represent a struggle between two opposing tendencies that we'll look at. That'll make sense as we move forward, like trust and mistrust, things like that. And these tendencies eventually represent personality traits that people will carry with them throughout the rest of their lives in some degree or another. And each stage, according to Erikson, is trying to find the midpoint between these, or some balance, maybe not exactly in the middle, but some balance between these two conflicting ideas or tendencies. It's not an either-or situation. It's kind of both and in what degree is it. And so what he's most known for, what's most notable about this, is that he's really the first one to take this idea and span it over an entire life. And so that makes it important. So Erikson's stages are as follows. First, you have trust versus mistrust. And this occurs in the first year of life. And it's at this point that babies decide whether or not the world is friendly or hostile. And that is generally based off whether or not their most basic needs are met and met in a timely fashion. And if they are, then they believe that they can trust the world. And this results in trust and hopefulness for them moving forward. And that's what we call the positive results of that situation. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this occurs between the ages of 1 and 3. During that time, the child has to develop control over their bodily functions and their environment around them. And so if they are successful in this time period, that means that they are toilet trained, they are able to walk, they control themselves as well as the world around them, or at least the ability to manipulate the world around them to their needs. The next stage is the initiative and guilt phase, and that lasts from 3 to 6 years of age. This happens as kids begin to be more exposed to a social world that exists outside of their house and immediate family. So when they start going to things like preschool and school, and so this then causes children to need to interact with other people. They have to take the initiative to start those interactions and to understand where boundaries are in those interactions. So they need to learn how to successfully assert themselves in their broader world without stepping on the toes of others. And so that's an important skill that they learn during this time. If they are able to do so, they come out of there with a greater sense of purpose. The last, or the fourth one, I guess, not the last, there's 8 of them. But the fourth one is this idea of industry versus inferiority. And from the ages of 6 to 12, kids become used to receiving feedback for the work that they do. So in school, they get feedback from the parents, they get praised, those sorts of things. And so they gain this sense of accomplishment and pride in getting things done. And through this, they become capable of, or they learn what they are capable of doing. And they continue to do that. And so at the end of this kind of feedback, or the end of this cycle, they are tied in with a sense of competence and an ability and understanding to get things done. Next, in the 5th stage, is identity versus role confusion. This is typically during adolescence, and you'll notice that Erikson shifts away from hard ages here towards just more general time frames, adolescence, young adulthood, etc., etc. And so in this adolescent phase, it is this search for identity that most adolescents go through, where people begin to question the type of person they are and to develop their own sense of values. If they are successful in resolving this phase, they have truthfulness to themselves, they understand who they are, and they are comfortable with themselves, which can then lead them to advance to the intimacy versus isolation stage in early adulthood, where people try to develop loving and meaningful, lasting relationship. And so this is seeking out companionship in not just intimate ways, but also in friendship ways, in order to develop truly meaningful relationship beyond just, oh, I've seen you in school a lot, so that's how that's going to be. And really go into meaningful, interactive relationships. The successful resolution of this phase allows one to learn to love in a mature and giving way, where they prioritize the needs of others. If they are not successful in this stage, oftentimes we see these people with feelings of isolation or lacking intimacy. The next stage in middle adulthood is generativity and stagnation. And this is typically the midlife crisis, if you wanted to give it a pop psychologist's terminology. But this is where people are struggling to be productive at both career and at home, while leaving a meaningful mark for the next generation to follow. Productivity in this level is called generativity, where they pass things on to the next generation that is meaningful and important. And then the last one is integrity and despair, and this occurs in old age and involves the struggle to come to terms with your life and the realization that life will end at some point. And this requires people to reflect on their lives and accept both their successes and failures. If they are able to do this, the result is wisdom, and if they fail to do this, the result is bitterness and despair. And so this you can tell when you interact with elderly people, if they have successfully resolved this or not. So that's Erikson's 8 stages of development. Next, we're going to go to Jean Piaget and his whole cognitive development theory. And he bases it off a concept he calls equilibration, which is this child's attempt to reach a balance between what they encounter in the environment and what cognitive structures or mental structures the child can bring to the situation. So how this works is the child tries to reach this equilibration through assimilation. That is, incorporating new ideas into existing schemas. And schemas are mental representational models. And so when a child finds information that doesn't fit into an existing schema, they have to modify the schema to include new information. And this process is called accommodation. So an example of that is children very early on learn that cats and dogs are animals. Those are some of the first they may learn. And those are both four-legged creatures that walk on 4 legs. And so when a child goes to a zoo, they see other things that walk and move like dogs and cats, and thus they assume they are animals. They may run into a problem when they run into a kangaroo or some other animal that moves on 2 legs. And so they have to then transform their schema, their mental representational model of what an animal is, to fit this new information. And that's called accommodation. Piaget believes that biological maturation is the main driving force in development, and he argues for 4 stages of development. The first is the sensorimotor stage, and this occurs usually during the first 2 years of life, and this is typified by reflexive reactions and circular reactions. And so reflexive reactions, of course, are like immediate reactions, and then circular are repeated behaviors where the infant figures out that they can manipulate the environment around them and benefit from it. And during this first 2 years, object permanence develops, and that is the knowledge that objects continue to exist even when they are outside the field of view. So initially they would not understand that if a ball rolls under the table, they may think it disappears, but object permanence is understanding that it's under the table and just out of sight, but that doesn't mean it disappears. Next is, during this stage, the child also lacks an ability to access their mental schemas or problem solve. And this is because they lack the real development of their brain at this point, as well as the experience. And so they're unable to perform these mental operations. But impressively, during this time, children are able to develop goal-oriented behavior. So if there is a toy they want to play with, they may not be able to walk, but they can figure out how to roll their way over there in order to get that toy that they want to play with. Next is the preoperational stage, and this typically occurs in children from ages 2 to 7, and this begins with the development of language. And why this is so important is because language represents this major shift to move towards symbolic thinking, and that is using words to replace objects. And that's a real different way of encountering the world and being able to express who you are, how you are feeling, and how you are engaging with the world around you. And so that is truly, truly an important stage. And other characteristics of this stage involve egocentrism, which is seeing the world only from their point of view. If you ever meet a child between these ages, they're not really able to understand how other people view the world. They're only able to understand the world as they see it. Then also they may suffer from artificialism, which is a belief that everything is human-made, or animism, a belief that everything is alive or living. And so they kind of go from part to whole and assume that if one thing is that, then everything else must be that. And so it's just it's not bad, it's just representative of this stage where the children just don't have the cognitive mental awareness to do that. The third stage is the concrete operational stage, which lasts generally from ages 7 to 11. And this is when children develop the ability to really start thinking. And one of the main things is reversibility, which is the ability to perform a mental operation, solve a problem, and then reverse their thinking back to the starting point to understand, how did I actually get here? How did I go from point A to point B? How did I solve this problem? And that's called reversibility. Also during this stage, children develop the concept of conservation, which is a really, really important idea. And that's the idea that an amount of substance doesn't change just because it's arranged differently. So if you have 2 clay balls, children will recognize that that has the equal amount of clay. But if you smash one and smush it down so it's no longer a ball, but maybe like a frisbee shape, children younger than 7 would not recognize that it has the same amount of substance. But children 7 to 11 would begin to understand that. You could also imagine having 2 different liquid containers. If you filled up a gallon jug with 10 ounces of water, or a 10-ounce pitcher with 10 ounces of water, children younger than 7 would not recognize that that's the same amount of liquid. They would not have the cognitive ability to understand that. But starting in the operational stage, the concrete operational stage, children are able to see that it's the same amount of liquid. Just because it's arranged differently doesn't mean there's less there. In the last stage of Piaget's development, the formal operational stage, this typically begins around the age of 12. And at this point, children are fully capable of understanding abstractions and symbolic relationships. So we're starting to move into higher order levels of thinking at this point, where they're really able to understand kind of complex topics and ideas that may not actually exist. During this phase, they're also able to really begin metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking, recognizing your cognitive processes, understanding how your mind is working to problem solve, and figure out ways to approach situations differently if at first they are not successful. So if they didn't solve a problem this way, they adapt it through a different methodology. And this age is also the point at which children begin to acquire hypothetical reasoning. So being able to understand potential situations even if they don't have any personal experience. Before this, they really have a difficult time with it, but after this, they're able to have hypothetical reasoning. So that was the end of kind of Piaget's. Now we're going to look at Lev Vygotsky, who proposes the sociocultural theory. And unlike Piaget, Vygotsky believes that much of cognitive development is the result of social factors and cultural factors. And he says that the absorption of knowledge into singular person happens from the environment and social contexts. And this process he calls internalization. And it's through this internalization, he argues, that we develop cognitively. And he says that the way this is done is through some complex thing that he calls the zone of proximal development. And the zone of proximal development is the gap between what a the ability of a child and the potential level of ability which that child is actually capable of. So there is, if you would imagine, a small circle of what a child is capable of doing, and then beyond that a larger circle of what the child is capable of doing, given that's their potential, given help what they can do. And he argues that children can reach this potential through what he calls scaffolding. And scaffolding is the social and cultural support system that surrounds people and allows them to move through the zone of proximal development. This is represented oftentimes through teachers and various parents and various other things in the society or the culture at large. So that's Lev Vygotsky. And the last one we'll look at is Kohlberg's moral development theory. And Kohlberg's moral development theory has 3 levels, and each of those has 2 distinct stages. And what he argues for and what he looks at is mostly moral reasoning more than overt behavior. So he's not looking for how people are acting, but rather how they are thinking and reasoning through things. So the first level, the preconventional level, and this is ages of 7 to 10. And at this point, there's 2 stages within the system of moral judgment, right? So each level has 2 stages. The first stage is based off avoiding punishment and receiving reward. So there's not much thought other than I want to receive a reward and I don't want to get hurt or punished or whatever that may be. And he knows this because when asked, children begin to mention fear of punishment as a reason why they follow rules. And so, but in this first stage of level 1, judgments tend to be motivated by fear. In the second stage, we move from making judgments based off fear to making judgments based off what's best for themselves. This becomes a very selfish stage. And if you know children this age, yes, it is selfish. And it's focused on individualism and exchange. But even though it emphasizes exchange, children are very intent during this stage to work for their own interest. And even though they try to make deals to maybe satisfy the other person, their primary interest is in themselves. And so they are always looking out for themselves and making decisions based off what will be best for them rather than what might be best for others. So that's level 1, the pre-conventional level, 7 to 10. The conventional level is level 2, occurs from about 10 to 16. And at this age, people begin to internalize society's rules and morals. And the motivation to follow these rules is generally the motivation for that is that the child knows it's the right thing to do. And so at the first stage of this level, which is the 3rd overall, children are living up to what others expect of them, and specifically at this time it's authority figures. So parents, coaches, teachers, and other things like that become really important for them to live up to those expectations. And they begin to have this understanding that rules set forth by society are important for some reason, and they try to conform to those rules. And mostly why they think that's important is because of the authority figures telling them that it is that way. The second stage in this level, and so the 4th overall stage, involves the development of the conscious. And young teens tend to, if they get to this stage, tend to obey the rules. And the reason why they do that is they feel some sense of moral or societal obligation to do so. So we're beginning to move away from like punishment or individual reasons and beginning to having a greater understanding of this is for the benefit of society to do this. Level 3 is the post-conventional level, and this occurs from age 16 onward, and again, 2 stages, but basically during this last level, there's a recognition that societal rules are important, but these people have developed an internal set of values that may sometimes conflict with societal values, and so they struggle to deal with that. So at stage 5, there is this kind of characterization of individual rights and social contracts, and so that could be the individual rights of life and liberty, property, happiness, whatever it may be, but also the social contracts that necessarily go along with that. And there is this conflict because sometimes individual rights may outweigh social contracts, and so a balance must be maintained in this level of development. And then the last stage, stage 6 overall, the second stage of the third level, it's the according to Kohlberg, this is the highest stage of moral development, and it's when people begin to develop and believe in principles, universal principles of justice, which are rules that typically, but don't always, agree with rules of society. And so if someone gets to this stage, they believe that universal principles of justice outweigh societal rules, and they begin to act accordingly. They have some moral standing or moral reasoning that says, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. There are universal principles of rightness and wrongness. And no matter what society says, I believe that these are right and wrong, and I will act that way. Very few individuals ever reach that level, according to Kohlberg, and so it's important that we recognize that this is a spectrum and people fall anywhere on there, and so the ages don't always line up. But that's Kohlberg's levels of moral development.